Today we will study the skeletal system of rabbit. The skeletal system of rabbit mainly consists of the axial and the appendicular skeleton. Axial skeleton consists of skull, vertebral column, ribs, sternum, while appendicular skeleton consists of limbs and girdles. The girdle of the forelimb is called the pectoral girdle and the hind limb is called pelvic girdle. The skull of rabbit. Any skull is a skeleton of head and jaws. It includes cranium or the brain case. It also consists of auditory and olfactory capsules, upper and lower jaw, and the hyoid apparatus. The cranium encloses the brain. Auditory capsule encloses the internal ears. Olfactory capsule, the nasal capsule, which includes the olfactory receptors, the smelling organ. The posterior end of the brain, there is the foramen magnum, and for the passage of the spinal cord. Then there is on side of it there is the occipital condyle, that is to articulate with the first vertebra. They are knob like prominence, that is called as occipital condyle. The skull of rabbit is diplocondylan, that is as in the case of fishes and amphibians, which is having only single condyle. This has double, so that is why it is called diplocondylan. While fishes and amphibians, as they have a single occipital condyle, it is called monocondylan. The skull of rabbit is very peculiar in the facial region that forms the snout, which is larger than the cranial region. The skull bones are numerous in number, and the adjacent ones are separated from each other by sutures or gaps, small sutures. So this is how the rabbit skull looks like. So it has a head and jaws, the cranium which encloses the brain, and the region of the olfactory and optic region, the two condylar processes which are seen to articulate with the vertebral column. So this is how the rabbit skull looks like. So now let us see the jaw suspension. The jaw suspension is of different types in vertebrates, like the autostylic, then there is craniostylic jaw suspension, that is seen in most of the mammals. It's also seen in rabbit. It's very different from that of the jaw suspension seen in amphibians, which is called as autostylic jaw suspension. This is a modified version of that autostylic jaw suspension, where the lower jaw, this is the lower jaw, this will articulate with the cranium with, there will be quadrate bone there, which will be articulated to the skull in autostylic jaw suspension. But in mammals, this quadrate becomes the inner ear bone, that is called incus. So there will be direct connection of the cranium and the lower jaw. So that is how craniostylic jaw suspension is. So in craniostylic jaw suspension, the lower jaw articulates with the skull directly. But in autostylic, this lower jaw will be connected to the skull through a bone called as quadrate bone. But here that quadrate bone has turned into incus of the small bone of the inner ear. So that's the difference. Coming to the vertebral column of the rabbit, you might have The vertebral column of rabbit consists of 45 to 47 vertebrae. There are 5 distinct regions in a rabbit, that is, the cervical or the neck region, the thoracic region, the lumbar region, the sacral region, and the caudal region. The cervical region consists of 7 vertebrae, the thoracic 12 to 13 vertebrae. Lumbar vertebrae consist of 7 in number, sacral 4, coccygeal or caudal 15. The vertebrae of rabbit is also called as acellus or amphiplatine, that is the centrum, will be flat at both ends. In embryonic stage, centrum consists of 3 pieces, that is a middle portion, a centrum proper, and anterior and posterior disc, that is called epiphysis. Later, the epiphysis join with the main piece. In between the adjacent centra, there is thin pad of fibrocartilage called as intervertebral disc. These act as shock absorbing cushions and also as washers to prevent the friction and wear and tear of the vertebra. Now let us look at the different vertebrae. So before that, the vertebral formula is given as C7, T12, L7, S4. The lumbar vertebrae of rabbit is called as typical vertebra because it is the largest, and as well as all the parts of it is well developed. The typical vertebra consists of the centrum, neural arch, then transverse processes. These are all transverse processes, and the centrum is a disc-like body of the vertebra. The centrum is known as acellus because it is flat at the posterior and anterior end. Fused at each end of the centrum is an epiphysis. Then from the centrum there is a neural arch which encloses the neural canal for the passage of spinal cord. At the base of the neural arch is a pair of notches in the front, that is in the front and the back. The front they are called intervertebral notches. When adjacent vertebrae closely articulate or join with each other, these notches come closer and form an intervertebral foramina. Foramina means opening, and from that the spinal nerves can pass through it. Neural arch bears a neural spine, and there are 2 lateral transverse processes. So, in the case of typical vertebra, there is a centrum. This is the centrum. So this is the centrum. Okay, this is the centrum. The centrum has an upper neural arch. This is the neural arch. Okay, this encloses the neural canal. This is the neural canal. Now, the neural arch is produced into a neural spine, and there are transverse processes. This is a transverse process. Now, when we observe the centrum, it is flat here and also flat here. That is why it is called acellus or amphiplatine. But this is the structure of a typical vertebra. Typical vertebra consists of centrum, neural arch, neural canal, neural spine, transverse processes. Centrum is acellus or amphiplatine. This neural canal is for the passage of spinal cord. At this region, you find certain notches. So when the adjacent vertebra come and join, there will be minute opening for the passage of spinal nerves. Okay. So neural canal is for the passage of spinal cord. Neural arch will surround the neural canal. Neural spine projects upward. Centrum, it is ventrally located, fits into the intervertebral disc. Transverse processes on other side of neural arch. Zygapophysis, the articulation is smooth facets with adjacent vertebra. Then the cervical vertebra, which we had discussed earlier, it is 7 in number. The first cervical vertebra is called atlas. Second cervical vertebra is called axis. Now this is the first cervical vertebra, that is the axis. Now all the mammals have 7 cervical vertebrae. That is very characteristic of the mammals, except for Polypus, which have 6 cervical vertebrae. Triticus and Tamandua have 9 vertebrae, cervical vertebrae, 8 to 9. Bradypus contains 10 cervical. With these, only these few animals have exceptions regarding cervical vertebrae. The rest of the mammals all have 7 cervical vertebrae. The cervical vertebrae has a reduced centrum, short transverse process, neural spine, and there is presence of a pair of vertebral arterial foramen at the base of each transverse process. The presence of a pair of much reduced and double-headed bony ribs completely fused with transverse process. The first cervical vertebrae is called atlas, second one is called axis. The first atlas is characteristic shape is ring-shaped. It does not have a centrum. The centrum separates from it early in the development, becomes the odontoid process of the axis. The neural spine is very much reduced. Transverse processes are flat. At the base of each of them is a vertebral arterial foramen, vertebral arterial foramen for the passage of vertebral artery. Pre-zygapophysis is absent. On the anterior face of the atlas, there is 2 occipital facets for articulation with the occipital condyles. The neural canal is mentioned, or it is partitioned to the upper spinal canal, and lower odontoid canal is partitioned by a transverse ligament called ligamentum transversum. Spinal cord lies in the spinal canal, and the odontoid process of the axis lies in the latter. For coming to, so I'll just refresh this thing. The vertebral column, rabbit in the vertebral column total എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് 45 to 47 vertebrae ഉണ്ടായില്ല. അതിൽ തന്നെ 5 ഡിഫറെൻറ്റ് റീജിയൻ ആയിട്ടാണ് അതിനെ തിരിച്ചിരിക്കുന്നത്. സെർവൈക്കൽ എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ നെക്ക് റീജിയനിൽ കാണുന്ന സെർവൈക്കൽ വെർട്ടിബ്ര, പിന്നെ കാണുന്ന റിബ്സിനോട് അറ്റാച്ച് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളതാണ് തൊറാസിക് വെർട്ടിബ്ര, പിന്നെ കാണുന്നത് നമ്മുടെ ഈ ബാക്ക് ലംബാർ വെർട്ടിബ്ര എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട്. പിന്നെ ഇവിടെ ഫ്യൂസ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് സാക്രം കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ കോഡൽ. ഇതിനൊക്കെ നമ്പേഴ്സ് ഉണ്ട്, ഡെഫിനിറ്റ് നമ്പേഴ്സ്. ഇപ്പോൾ സെർവൈക്കൽ വെർട്ടിബ്ര എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് 7 എണ്ണേ ഉണ്ടാവുള്ളൂ. തൊറാസിക് ആണെങ്കിൽ 12 to 13 ഉണ്ടാവാം. ലംബാർ ഓൾസോ ഈസ് അബൌട്ട് 7. Then sacral is fused, that is 4 vertebrae are fused with each other, and the coccygeal or caudal, that is about 15. അപ്പോൾ അങ്ങനെ ഡിഫറെൻ്റ് ആയിട്ട് ഇതിനെ തിരിച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. ആംഫീബിയൻ ദി റാബിറ്റിൻ്റെ സെൻട്രം നോക്കിക്കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ആംഫിപ്ലാറ്റീൻ ആണ്. ആംഫിപ്ലാറ്റീൻ എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ സെൻട്രത്തിൻ്റെ ആൻറ്റീരിയർ പോസ്റ്റീരിയർ ഭാഗങ്ങൾ നോക്കി അത് ഫ്ലാറ്റ് ആയിട്ടാണ് കാണുക. ചിലതിൽ കോൺകേവ് ആയിരിക്കും, ഒരു ഭാഗം കോൺകേവ് ആയിരിക്കും, അടുത്ത ഭാഗം കോൺവെക്സ് ആയിരിക്കും. ചിലതിൽ 2 സൈഡും കോൺകേവ് ഒക്കെ ആയിരിക്കും. അങ്ങനെ ഡിഫറെൻറ്റ് ടൈപ്സ് ഓഫ് സെൻട്രം ഉള്ളതിനെ ബേസ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് വെർട്ടിബ്രേനെ ക്ലാസിഫൈ ചെയ്തിട്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ ഉള്ളത് ACLS, ആംഫിപ്ലാറ്റി എന്ന് മാത്രം നമുക്ക് പഠിച്ചാൽ മതി.